Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Riggs. I'll be moderating the next session. And just as an FYI, we have combined the next two sessions into one because the topics will overlap. And so we should run until about 12:15, 12:30. In terms of scorecard, it looks like Broadway 1, most of you 0. And so we're going to hope that you shake it off just a little bit. I'll be calling on some of you throughout the next hour and a half. And unfortunately, for a lot of you, I know who you are and I know your names, so there's no hiding. You may have about 30 seconds to get out of here if you don't want to talk. Oh, Larry, I'm looking right at you, brother. Well, good morning. The morning sessions kind of blew my mind in terms of content. Anybody else feel that way? Like, holy Moses, I'm not sure quite how I feel, but we're going to continue along the veins of AI and maybe shift just a little bit to the human side of AI, explore concepts around the bridge between the public and private sector from a leadership standpoint. And we've got some great topics lined up, and we've got great speakers. For those of you who don't know me, I run a small consulting firm just outside of Philadelphia. We focus primarily in the nonprofit space, but also do some government work and some for-profit work. And our firm focuses on strategy, leadership, and branding communications. I actually learned most of what I practice now from Gordon Rudow, who is one of our speakers. He is a partner in a large organizational development firm called OliverWyman. He, for many years, ran his own firm out of San Francisco and worked with Fortune 1000 and sometimes Fortune 500 companies in spaces that span from leadership to employee engagement. And most recently, just started a company focused on AI and its ability to pinpoint qualitative research in the employee engagement space. And so he is uniquely qualified to talk from the private sector, but also the public sector space. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say in terms of our ability as leaders to bridge those gaps that are so prevalent in this world. I should let all of you know that Gordon and I have known each other since the 6th grade. We've been best friends since then. He lives here in Nashville, so it was a natural invitation. And although I avoided Broadway last night, I did not avoid the wrath of Gordon and I going to a bourbon tasting at a distillery and then off to dinner where we caught up. And we've managed to maintain a really great professional and personal relationship for the past 30 plus years, even before cell phones and the internet, which I know a lot of you in this room remember those days. But maintaining such a great friendship through all of that has been easy. He's a highly intelligent individual. His firm was purchased a few years, how many years ago? 10 years ago, he sold his firm to a company called Lippincott, which was purchased by OliverWyman, and he ascended through the ranks in all three of those companies. It's a great honor to have him here, and I look forward to not just making fun of our relationship, but also hearing what he has to say. I don't think I need to introduce Maria. No? Great, we can get right into it. Again, this is meant to be an inclusive engagement. I know it's not always easy to speak up in situations like this, but we rely on all of you to shape the future of IJIS programming, and your responses aren't just for the here and now, but they're meant to help us determine what you all need in terms of programs and programming. Before we get started, we're going to ask you guys to pull out your phones and take a quick 4-question survey, which will help guide our conversation today. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll get into it. All right, I think we're all good. If not, you have a couple more seconds. Before we get into the results, which will feed our conversation for the next 60 minutes, I just want to go over the 4 areas that we're going to cover with our esteemed panelists. The first area that we'll explore is the human factor and as it relates to AI. Now, we've talked a little bit this morning about policy. We've talked about things as broad as the Constitution, but there is a human element, at least now, that's heavily involved in the delivery, the design, and the execution of AI components. We also want to talk about AI as a convener, catalyst, or divider between the public and private sector. AI and the talent conundrum, what will that do to our teams, to ourselves, to our positions? And then, what does the future look like for all of us in terms of leadership and the AI? I think we can all agree that AI is now and will be in the future something that we can't ignore from a leadership standpoint. And as if we didn't need another challenge to leading in today's post-COVID, post-civil discourse environment, the rapid ascension of AI into our daily lives is really creating some unique challenges. The first question, if you could put those results up, Alex, that we asked was, what do you see as the main challenges for you as leaders regarding AI? So, no problem. And before we get those results, you know, I really want to hear from Gordon in terms of what skill sets have you observed in the Fortune 1000 companies that you've worked with that have served as a catalyst for change. And Maria, for you, I'd love for you to think about, you know, what does it look like in terms of our leaders between the public and private sector, and how can we learn from a leadership training standpoint, and how can we teach? Okay, so what do we see as the main challenges? It's, wow, you've got, can you guys both see that?
Yeah, and it is typical, D, all of the above, right? These are wide-ranging. Each one has unique issues. Can I ask one other sort of live polling question, Brian? Do a little audible here. So a moment of honesty, if we can, from the group. Show of hands. How many of you feel more anxious now than you did at 8 a.m. this morning before these sessions went on? Okay. That was, I think, 87.5%. Okay. So you asked a question about leadership. And we're going to get personal here, and we're going to have a conversation about this. I'm going to get into human biology a little bit. So more anxious probably by a couple points. The way the hands went up, it was pretty clear. Managing anxiety, self-regulation, leadership point number one. When we are in a state of fear, as most of us sort of wrestle with our own physical experience, we feel sweaty palms, you feel your heart racing a little bit, you're running into all these scenarios this morning as you hear these different issues. What do they mean to my organization? What does it mean to me? How am I going to live up to all this stuff? And as that happens, what is going on in your body? You know, you have a rush of cortisol, you have a noradrenaline. What you don't have are these sort of calming hormones like oxytocin. Now, your teams are going to need that if you're going to lead them. You know, if you're leading your teams from a place of anxiety and fear, typically not so good results come out of that. You know, the first thing that we learn when we get on a plane is sort of put that mask on yourself before even your child. So I know it's a little woo-woo as a place to start in leadership work, but I'll start with self-regulation. Like, we really need to understand the fears, the anxieties, all of the risks. Spent a lot of time talking about risks this morning, but you also have to look at rewards. You have to think about where you're leading from a place of protection or from a visionary, inspiring place. You need to understand the fears. You need to understand all of the implications and the risks, the costs, and all of those dynamics. But once you do that and you have that sense of understanding, I think my first answer would be is sort of getting into a learner's mindset, a beginner's mindset, a calm, self-regulated place that says, I get what we're going through. We've been through hard things before. I certainly have in my life. I know you all have conquered uncertainty. This is a new one, but you've done this before. So my quick story about this and where my point of view, or one of the places it comes from, you know, at OliverWyman, We do a lot of work. You might have seen us. We talk at Davos. We do a lot of research papers. We're a $3 billion management consultancy, and we do a lot of work in the public-private collaborations. We're pitching a project in Europe, and this one stands out to me. It was about 3 years ago. And the CEO had about a $50 million RFP out. So OliverWyman and all of our competitors, Bain, McKinsey, BCG, all the big consulting firms are going after it. And energy company in Europe, so they're dealing with, small boutique software companies that are inventing new technology for them. They're dealing with non-government organizations, regulatory bodies, government organizations. The job of the CEO probably 10 years ago was a top-down management of a P&L. Now he finds himself leading a wide array of stakeholders in a public-private partnership, some boutique technology, fast-moving companies, some very slow-moving organizations, and he's responsible for all of that. So coming to these firms like ours to get help. We ended up winning this work, and the partner who won it told me this story, and it just stayed with me, is that said to the CEO, hey, we're thrilled we got this over all of our big competitors. Why'd you choose us? And he said, listen, I don't know where I'm going here. I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And you know what? You don't either. I don't believe you do. I don't believe any of your competitors. They're going to tell me that they know where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. But I understood from you and your team, the way that you work, the way that you listen, the way that you want to work with me, I get that I'm going to get there faster and more effectively with you, learning together than I would with anybody else. And this group, full disclosure, not all my colleagues are all that humble. We're in a consulting firm where we sell ourselves to be the smartest in the room. We have the answers. We don't speak unless we have really intelligent things to say. That's how we're trained in this management consultancy. But sometimes, and I think more in the last couple of years, Bryce, you talk about these post-COVID changes and the things that we are now living in chaos and complexity, and our tool sets and our understanding of how things go aren't going to get us there in the same way. So I guess my first answer to the question is humility. What do we need to learn, and what skills are going to help us through this? Humility, curiosity, beginner's mind, self-regulation, a sense of deep understanding of the nuance, but also front-footedness, knowing that we have to get through this. We're going to get through this. There's simplicity on the front side, there's complexity, and then there's simplicity, again, on the other side of complexity. But you need to get through all of the dirt and get your hands really messy in this work. And I think it takes a different kind of leadership than one that says, I've got the answers, and I'm marching forward, and everyone follow me. I think it requires, certainly in the kind of work that you all do, a different kind of stakeholder management. So I'm sure we'll dive more into that.
But before I turn this over to Maria, I love that. And I think this concept of beginner's mindset versus expert mindset obviously touches on a little bit of the humility piece. But I guess my question to Maria is, how effective can we be from a public sector, private sector side to walk together as beginners in conquering sort of what lies ahead? Is this an opportunity for us to close the gap as leaders?
So a couple of threads I want to pull. On the one hand, unequivocally, it allows and gives the IJIS community, and I'm focusing on the word community, the opportunity to fill some of the gap of some of the references Gordon made. So education, learning, the comfort with the risk and the potential failures, even if they're little failures, is something that we all have to go through as we, as individuals, move towards AI. Where I think that there's a distinction, so I'm playing a little bit of Sybil here up here, is that on the one hand, the private sector component of our community is going to be more comfortable with it, they're going to be the autocracy or the China in David's reference, that it's going to be a tool that a company may have implemented in their environment, and they're going to have the ability to play with it, and they're going to find out that the David Brays of the world may or may not have written some books, et cetera. From the public sector world, and it's not necessarily just the justice community, but we know that the justice community is far more traditional than the others. From public sector in general, they're going to be more adverse to risk. And why? Because they're going to be doing it in different environments that then speaks to so many different issues. It's going to be the access to the data, it's going to be the risk to the data, it's going to be the policy issues that are out of their control, it's going to be internal policies even within their organizations of what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So bringing back where is the opportunity, the education has to be fundamental on all levels to all groups. The common messages between the public and the private and the dialogues to achieve those common messages have to be something that we collectively work on. So frankly, not only sessions like this, but then continuing sessions on these topics through the use cases of the sort of the working group that Ashwini mentioned earlier. All of that has to be married and progressive. And ultimately, even a point that we chatted about when we were prepping for these sessions, the distinction and the education to the two disparate groups of public versus private, there's a lot of common denominators, but there's also an issue of language. And to public sector, we need to be prepared to speak in their vernacular and address their concerns in advance when we're chatting with them. And, I have several pieces of paper up here because we do want to call on you through this session and be able to either confirm or deny some of the things that we're putting out here. Our perspective, certainly mine that I'm giving, is from either prior lives, past lives, different hats, and the sort of the community that we are. But with AI, this is new to all of us, and that goes back to the vulnerability, that goes back to the being willing to risk and make a mistake. And that goes back to, we know it's coming, so there's no options there. And according to David, it's coming at far greater a pace than anything else that we've experienced in the past. So we do need to jump into the deep end of the pool and survive. And that there's going to be mistakes, but certainly survive in the end.
Good. Thank you, Maria. One thing I loved that David said, and I can't get it out of my head, he said, good leaders step outside of expectations. And before we move on, show of hands if you're on the private sector side. Public sector remaining. Great. What are your thoughts, public and private sector individuals in the audience, in terms of your ability to be intentional about working together from a place of learner and not leader with each other? Because I don't know that does that happen today, and is AI our greatest opportunity to collaborate from a leadership standpoint? Brian?
It's like the student in the back of the class.
So I think from my perspective, with regard to the leadership in the AI space, the challenges and the areas that I find myself spending most of my time is in the area of defense of the technology and defense of the controls around the technologies. This is defeating long-standing perceptions. And again, I'm not an AI expert, but it falls to leadership to recognize and defeat the long-standing AI misconceptions or proper conceptions of the technology, but in doing so, try to allay the fears of not only my organization, my constituency, my customers, and my leadership. So I think it's important that if you're leading in this space, I think you must not be a bystander. You must not wait for the technology to evolve around you. I think you have to step into it, and you've got to be the advocate for it in a proper way.
Yeah, those are great points. from a private to public sector perspective, I mean, we heard David talk about the trust in the nonprofit sector. I mean, if you're on the private side, anyone care to weigh in from the private side in terms of your ability, intention, or even capacity to work collaboratively with the public sector?
Okay. So for the last 30 years or so, I've been a management consultant helping IJIS, the IJIS community get together, work together, talk together when they don't have a lot of trust across even the vertical, say, law enforcement, or then when you go to courts and corrections. And the approach that I've had is to be the person that is ready to get hung out to dry by bringing up tough questions in that community and being the foil or the lightning rod that everybody goes after. And there are times when they say, Mr. Wheeler, thank you for your service, and we'll see you later. But there are times when they go, oh my God, we needed to talk about that stuff and deal with that stuff, even though it's really scary. I work a lot with judges, and they don't like to be wrong. They don't like to be caught for the fool. And when they talk about technology, they're not super comfortable. So try to provide a safe space to have those discussions.
Thanks, Joe. We got one more?
Yeah, IJIS is a perfect place for that public-private partnership. And that's why I'm here, to hear your viewpoints. But we're all learning on this particular category. And you're going to see a parade of medicine shows out there. The wagons are forming now, and they're holding up their bottles of AI hair tonic, So we can work together to work past that and come up with use cases and roadmaps, to help people navigate through this pile. And just move forward with the committee on AI and make sure we're meeting the goals and objectives of the membership.
Yeah, I love that. I've always seen nonprofits as a sandbox to practice leadership, and so IJIS certainly stands at the center of that.
So Brian, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask the audience one other question. For those of you on the private sector side, or actually even on the public, are any of your agencies moving towards the conversations or the real conversations of implementing some chat GPT, some product agnostic answer that basically says, we're considering it, we know that we're going to do it contained, but we want to play with it. It's going to be in a controlled environment. Is there even the interest, or are they having the conversation, or frankly, and I say this with all due respect, because again, I know it from having lived it, from a public sector perspective, are they just dealing with the day-to-day? They're not concerned with what's happening outside their agencies because frankly, their priorities are too time sensitive and their resources from a financial perspective might be limited.
Agencies we deal with, at the mid-level management level, they're engaging with us on ChatGPT or AI. At the executive level, they're not even addressing it yet a lot of times. So that mid-level management, they're playing with it because they see it as a game changer for them, right? Because they're constantly asked to do more with the same resources or less. So they see it as innovative. But at the top, we see lip service given to it, but no real, directive given to staff on this is what we do, this is how we're going to do it, this is why we're doing it. So we see that.
Great. We just lost visuals. When you guys get that back up, could you put the next polling question? Go ahead.
Yeah, on adoptions right now, there's obvious places like legal research, and areas like that, but everyone's moving or really looking hard at using AI in the front end of cybersecurity. If you've got a tool, you get this massive pile of data and false and real hits, and so humans just aren't keeping up with that. So AI is being put in the front of that to sort it out and then figure out what's really important and feeding it to humans. So that's the early adoption that I'm seeing right now.
Fair enough. I'm going to recruit. Erica, if you don't mind me asking, Erica Smith is from BJS. Are there any conversations at the Fed level within your organization, and maybe even within IJ, because I'm thinking about the whole research component, that they're talking about it?
That's my athleticism today.
Sorry.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you asked me to say something because I had a couple thoughts here. So I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now is that, where I sit within the Department of Justice, we're coming at it from a slightly different perspective, right? It's less tactical, operational perspective, right? Because we're gathering statistics, we're doing research, things like that. But I think my team and I have seen a real opportunity to create massive efficiencies in how we do our work. But to the point that you were making earlier about needing to be very self-regulated in how we approach these things, that's not often the mindset that we're encountering when we're messaging these things up, right? Because there's so much in the public sector that is reactive. And so when you're trying to do something new, if you can't demonstrate that you know every possible thing that can happen and exactly what is needed to get there, you will encounter people who are definitely not regulating their responses. And that is the biggest challenge. I would say we're right now, Andrea, my colleague Andrea here, and I are working on what I would say in the almost 25 years that I've worked there is the single most successful data collection project that I've ever been a part of. And it is all based on using AI technologies to gather calls for service data and parse them out and set up a model that actually does that work for us. We're excited, but then to try to message that up and say we could use some more funding. Could always use more funding, right? But you could use more funding for it. It is very challenging. At NIJ, they have a real appetite for trying to take all of the research that they have been doing and use some type of AI modeling or something, something in that sort of family of technologies that would help them understand what have we done in the past, what has worked, where do we, what are our gaps? And I think they're struggling to figure out how to do that right now. Yeah, and then with budget cuts, none of that is helpful.
I think you raise a really great internal team challenge. And I wonder, Gordon, if you wouldn't mind shedding some light on the work that you've done over the past 30 plus years in helping teams overcome internal challenges, right? Because I think we're all going to see that either as leader or team member, advancing our own visions, and Maria has some great thoughts on visionary and leader and manager. But what can we anticipate in terms of those challenges, and maybe how can teams, I won't say sidestep because there's some government folks in here, but how do you work around that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the crux of this issue, right? We have to bring our organizations on board, our leaders on board. We can't be successful in any of these things individually. This is a complete team sport that we're in right here. One of the things that this gentleman brought up that I think is important is that you can't be on the sidelines on this, and your leaders can't be. And getting off the sidelines doesn't necessarily mean jumping into the deep end of the pool. In many times, to get your leaders, your stakeholders to engage, you got to get them to get a toe in the water and then up to their ankles and then eventually their knees. I mean, I have my leaders writing essays, doing research projects, writing songs, play with the technology so that you have a positive experience with it, and that toe in the water experience of writing your kid a birthday card or a personalized message or a small research project for your marketing plan for this thing that you're doing, or writing recipes, whatever that might be, will be a feedback loop for you that this isn't so scary, and then maybe I can try the next thing and the next thing. So I think there is a real flywheel aspect to this stuff, that it just takes a bunch to get the flywheel going your organization, and when you have stakeholders that aren't on board, a lot of the work that I do is getting sort of beneath the surface of that, doing the qual research and just the mindset of qual research, which is this person has a set of concerns, right? This individual is not resisting me to resist me. They've got a set of concerns. You might even say that there's things that they're trying to control. And when you dive into the psychological dimensions of, and even emotional dimensions of what are they trying to control, what are their concerns, and how can I message or engage with them in a way that embraces those concerns, understands those concerns, has them feel seen, heard, and understood, and then moves them closer to addressing one of them or two of them and eventually all of them. So I think there is a real change curve sort of dimension to this stuff. If you just understand the laws of grief and change, and that people go through some denial, some anger, some fear, some sadness. You're letting go of a set of controls that you'd love to have before if you're a leader of an organization that was very top down and very mechanistic and automated only things that you needed to, or you have a few people that you trust and now you have to let go of your span of control and allow AI to do work for you. That's scary. So I think a big piece of our work as leaders is to, help people go through their change curve, think about their underlying concerns, and really get to the heart of what this individual needs to take one step forward before they start leaping into the pool. And if you ask them to jump into the deep end of the pool and you're not getting all the adoption you want, well then again, take some responsibility over this. I'll leave you this one thought. This was given to me recently. How many of us look at like the people that we're managing, like your situation with your leaders, and say, I've got some difficult people to manage in my world? How many of you have what you consider sort of difficult people to manage to get your job done? A moment of honesty. Come on, people, really? Okay.
There's probably like a handful of teams in here, so we get it. You're not allowed to raise your hand.
So this distinction was offered to me. This was brought up by a speaker in a group, and we in the world of change management and leadership, we have 200 people in the audience, and everyone raised their hand and sort of got the bait on that one too. And he said, well, what if there are no difficult people? What if there are no difficult clients or stakeholders? What if that's not true? What if the difficulty that you're experiencing, what you call difficult, is being at the edge of your own development? Being at the edge of, I've got a thing I want them to do, a thing I want them to believe, a thing that I want done, or an outcome that I'm trying to achieve, and they're not doing it. They're not buying it. So they're not doing the things that I care about, but are they difficult, or is the difficulty feeling the edge of my ability to make that so? And is that my work, or is that their work? So, again, I think in the world of leadership, in a situation like this, I always go back to we are the we here, We want to make this stuff happen. We are the we, right? You can look at your stakeholders or your bosses, and we might have people levels above us, and that's fine. But leadership is about achieving a particular goal using all of your presence and all of your resources, and that's our responsibility. So just think about, when you're dealing with the stakeholder management stuff, what can I do to walk them into the pool? What can I do to understand them? How do I get them over their edges? And what is my inner work in self-regulation or in my own listening or empathy or my own impatience that is either supporting or not supporting me getting it done?
Yeah, I think I heard efficiencies over there, and I hear internal challenges, and maybe some folks from the public sector. What do we have in front of us in terms of legacy mindset, and what does that look like? Because as David said earlier, this train is moving really fast. So maybe Brian, what are you seeing in terms of legacy leadership attributes? And Maria, maybe even you can weigh in. What are we afraid of that are potential sort of roadblocks. I mean, clearly, we think AI is going to be a game changer for the nonprofit public space. And thank God, right? I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of hearing how slow the public space moves, how slow nonprofits move. Well, they move that way for a lot of different reasons. But maybe, Brian, weigh in. What are you afraid of in terms of legacy mindset?
Not sure it's what I'm afraid of with regard to legacy mindset, but it's overcoming some of the legacy mindset. I really appreciate, you gave me an aha moment here when you said, tell everybody to get an account, to actually use AI for some kind of a small, inconsequential project. It took me back about 6 years because that's precisely what we did with cloud. We essentially told all of our software developers, I don't care whether it's a Hello World application. I want you to go out and use the infrastructure and become familiar. And that's how we got that critical momentum. I think the leadership, the legacy leadership is wanting to have all of the answers before you engage your team. The notion that I want to be fully prepared, I want to be fully knowledgeable, I want to be, lead from the front from a standpoint of awareness. And technologies like this, we won't be able to. Technologies like this, we truly need to create the environment, the culture of learning, and let our people lead us in some regards. So I think the legacy leadership aspect of big bold leader out front is maybe not the secret sauce to this evolution. Maybe it's enabler. Maybe it's an encourager. Maybe it's somebody that says, I'm going to give you a little bit of time this week to just explore.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I think that was my aha moment was 5-6 years ago. This is precisely, maybe a little longer than that now. It's precisely where we were with our cloud implementation. So,
In order for that to succeed, which it did, and it would in this circumstance, that formula included a leader with vision. It included technical resources that then were easily able to get access to whatever tool that then they could play in the environment. And then in this case, it happened to have the group that was able to either make the decision or influence the decision to progress. And what I'm grappling with here is that that's not the general circumstance that either the 18,000 law enforcement agencies or the public sector community within justice and beyond have. On the one hand, the ones that feel comfortable with it are going to come from the IT side of the house. And that presumes that they may or may not have a CIO. That could be the visionary. Or, in fact, that there is somebody savvy enough to say, we should move to this if you want the analytics that you're asking me for. But again, that also presumes that on the other side of the house, there's somebody operationally saying, I want to see 6 years down the line to see what the pattern is. So when you were remembering Joe Brennan's presentation from yesterday, he had sliced and diced the data so much that he created the loop. Here's my data to define my problem areas, to focus on the problem areas, to develop the operational response, to reduce the numbers from a cause and effect, and then to reassess the numbers to figure out what my remaining priorities are. So he created that circumstance, and here's the reality of it. He didn't do it with AI. He was doing it manually 10 years ago. He's doing it with enhanced tools 10 years later. And as much as I know he would love to jump, and I don't see him in the room, which is why I'm not tagging him right now, as much as I know that he would like to, tag and utilize AI for the efficiency and all the good that it can bring, and maybe New Jersey is a good example of where they would dabble in it because they have both sides of the community. I don't think that they stop the progress, right? Nonetheless, public sector, public sector and law enforcement in general, they keep doing the job. Now, they're not doing it as much as they could. They are not getting as far down the road as they could from an efficiency standpoint. But I think it takes several different ingredients in order to succeed. And private sector has it all on public sector.
Thank you, Marie. We have a comment in the back, and then Gordon wants to weigh in.
Yeah, so I had a question thinking back to other game-changing things that have happened in our industry, like just information sharing, right? After 9/11, we realize we have all these silos of information, and just talking about the idea of sharing information scared the hell out of a lot of chiefs and sheriffs, right? No, it's my freaking data, right? I'm not sharing it. It's just an institutionalized sort of thing. And so I think AI or cloud, as Brian mentioned, is it really just the human experience where it's a generational change, or it's that they have to wait till it's just inevitable, they can no longer ignore it because now everyone else is doing it, so now I got to do it, and then they really engage with it? So you have the visionaries, people looking for parity, and then always have the laggards. Right? Is it just the human piece of it, just as a natural timeline of progression that no matter how much we want to have it happen, you just kind of have to wait for it to happen naturally?
That might be the poll you might want to pull up on that one.
Can I? Oh, go,
Yeah, go for it.
All right. As I sort of gave myself the problem that I wanted everybody to discuss, I actually came to a potential solution. So let me throw this in here. The sandbox that Brian created within IJIS, the challenge that I see happening from a local perspective or from an agency perspective could be solved when I'm thinking about the next steps in the IJIS community. It's not impossible that the IJIS community, via a nonprofit organization, might be able to create an environment that public sector entities can come and play in, right? So that gains them the ability to not risk anything other than the educational process, other than connecting to it, et cetera. So I'm just working on the solves while we're discussing the challenges.
I just want to remind everyone that I'm the moderator.
And you're doing a great job, Brian. So one thing I'd add, if I may, Brian, is that okay?
Go ahead.
Thank you for permission, sir. So when I was thinking about this session, and you're teeing this up, so I just want to make sure we cover it before we part ways. If I have one piece of advice that sort of sums up a lot of this, it's a little bit of your sandbox idea, and what I'd phrase as protected experiments. And those two words, protected and experiments, are both pretty intentional in language. So protected, in the public sector, and I've done a ton of work in both public and also in healthcare and aviation and highly regulated environments. And sure, there is more risk aversion for a variety of reasons. When we want to do innovative work in those environments, we protect them. We think about it as like an entrepreneuring effort, a firewall. We have to do something in a piloted way that is not overly influenced by the policies and organizational dynamics and culture of host system, whatever that system is. If you want to get something done in your bureaucratic environment and prove that it can get done well, it's likely not going to follow all of the rules of the system today. You have to put a little bit of a wall around it and say, I'm going to try this thing, and I'm not going to follow policies A, B, C, and D. Can I do that for 6 months and see what happens? I'm going to do it in this small way with this small group and this small group of data, but I want to prove out before you allow me to do this at scale that it can work here. So protected. Now experiments, again, in terms of language, it may fail. It will likely have some aspect of learning. You could call that failure, or some friction that you'll experience, or some bumps that have arisen, and things that you will want to apply as you bring things to scale. So having again, beginner's mindset at scale, a real leadership adaptability. And we studied this for a period of time. I actually led in my organization, we did a lot of research work, and one of the things that we researched is organizations that were highly adaptive over decades and what kind of leadership allowed that to be so. And we looked at everything from sports teams to things like Cirque du Soleil, to rock bands and a lot of big companies like Zara, who launches products in 6 weeks when everyone does it in 52 weeks. How do they do this sort of agile thing consistently and sustainably? And we found 3 leadership traits. So I'll just offer this as a way of thinking about it. One was what we called open sensing. Open sensing means that you're able to be a sponge and absorb things from multiple environments. If you're in a particular sector, it's very natural to study that sector and understand what your corroborators, collaborators, competitors are doing. But it's more interesting to learn from a completely different sector. You know, what can you learn in technology from, you know, an oil change company? How does Formula One teach you something about how a team can operate in a data environment? You know, so studying different environments is really key. So open sensing is a mindset, but it's also a way of researching and exploring all of the domains outside of the one that you live in. And then the second one was what we called inspiring ambition. So based on all of what you've learned and studied from these other environments, do you have the capacity, because these are skills, to actually inspire people to be willing to do things that they wouldn't be willing to do otherwise? The stakeholder management, the getting the leaders to try things. And inspiring ambition requires having, you know, a visionary idea, something compelling, something that also addresses their concerns, not a visionary idea that's abstract to or counter to the things that your stakeholders care about, but really in alignment with that. And that's where getting your hands dirty is really important, because you can study this stuff, but you have to sort of do it together. At least that's my belief in terms of inspiring people in this particular kind of complexity to do things that are outside of their norm. And the last one is what we call adaptive co-creation, which is, you know, your systems are going to need to change. Your infrastructure, the way that you carry your data, the way that you policy your information sharing, all of these systems are going to have to change. And you need to involve those stakeholders, because everyone in their silos, everyone in their little pieces of your organization are protecting their own little bit. And you have to get people to be willing to be more giving, spacious, curious, expansive around those things. So adapting the systems, adapting together, and building an infrastructure that allows for more agility. So, I mean, these things are really leadership skills. They're not just like ways of orienting. You have to actually build a capacity to study laterally. You have to actually build a capacity to be visionary and to excite people, to inspire people, to listen people, to understand what they care about. And certainly a skill set in inviting people to give up their control and work with you in a different way. So these are some of the things I just didn't want to lose, because, you know, this is experimental. We are absolutely going into uncharted territory. And one of the things I learned from Brian is that you can really learn, as you're sharing from your cloud computing stories, you can learn from history. Like, this AI stuff might be new, but we've gotten through chaos and complexity and unknown territories before. And it's in our muscle memory. And you have to get people, or hopefully you can help people, get into their own muscle memory and allow that to happen.
Yeah, great segue into our next area, which is the talent situation. And just for clarity, I'm a giant history nerd. That's what Gordon was referring to, and spent a lot of time looking at sort of movements over time, and particularly how we react as people. And so studying history has allowed me to kind of look at current narratives through a very unique lens, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. As we think about teams, what's AI going to do to our people, both in the public space and the private space? I mean, they're anticipating the removal of several thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs, or the recreating of jobs. And Maria, why don't you lead us into the scenario you painted for us yesterday in terms of, can this free some of our teams to do more thoughtful work?
And the reference that Brian is making is that when we spoke about how is it going to affect law enforcement, public sector, et cetera, my immediate response was, knowing from the agency level, if you're going to save me X amount of dollars that I am now paying the IT folks or the analytics, that's going to be utilized via a tool, and I have all that money still left in my budget, and that's an important thing. I still have that, or I still have those bodies, because we know, especially at the local levels, some of the IT folks that are there and or some of the analysts sometimes that are there are because they were on light duty of some sort. They're going to be put back on the streets. They're going to be put back in the operations. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be put in the officer role. That just means that they're going to have value and not lose what is the contribution to the agency. Now, that response was to the law enforcement segment. And I think that that would absolutely apply to the other justice models or the public sector. The caveat that I'll put, which I didn't really mention yesterday, is if the executives at hand are looking for dollars because, oh, now you saved all these dollars, that will be the debate on many different levels. I think that's a longer term debate, though. I think that's something that can only be validated and proven X amount of years later, and frankly, by that point, there would have been justification for the use of those individuals or the use of the value of those dollars back to the individuals and back to the operation. So in the end, I think it'll be an extreme plus on the public sector side. From the private sector side, and you all need to contribute to this as well, from the private sector side, it's going to be one more thing for you to master and then necessarily support the public sector. Again, I don't see it as a loss or a risk of jobs. I would actually love to know some of the individuals in this room, and I'm going to tag Joe or Jim from Mission Critical. Am I correct in that assumption today? If you guys got a tool today that fixed whatever it is, problem ABC, would they toss the resources because of the bottom line? Or would they reappropriate those resources for another challenge that they have on the list, but maybe right at the moment can't deal with? And Larry, you're bopping your head. What's your thought?
It depends. It can go either way.
Right. And sort of why I don't understand myself.
If cost is an issue in the company, then yeah, then perhaps we would, I mean, you hope that we would repurpose people, but there are certain situations where, yeah, people would be let go. Absolutely.
Decades ago, when we went back and forth from an IT perspective on consolidation of resources, right? Do you centralize, do you decentralize, the bodies, et cetera? It would always be the risk and the worry and the panic by the employees. Okay, if you're gonna consolidate all these different dispatch centers, oh my God, we're gonna lose all these call takers and dispatchers. And when I was on the private sector side, we amalgamated the organizations. We didn't lose the bodies. It was all a good thing. But the culture shock, the educational process, the risk management, the speaking their vernacular, the understanding their worries and their concerns was addressed. I will say it was utterly exhausting, but it was addressed. But it was valuable to the process. But I'm with you that today it might be a 50-50 shot. But I would focus on this one line only because I think that it's not a given that AI is going to make you lose your job. This is strictly the same reality today as is tomorrow. If a company is bought out, you still don't know if you have a job for the rest of your career. Stuff happens, change, affects change and outcomes, and AI is not the factor. AI is not the good or the bad evil, right? This is just one more element of change.
I know you're chomping at the bit, Gordon.
Well, there's a couple pieces. You have a question first? Is there a comment? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Once again,
I think that law enforcement, policing, is in a very unique position when it comes to AI because we're looking at it primarily in this group from the standpoint of enterprise-wide types of solutions using AI. But I think we're going to see more and more of a rise of criminal use of AI, and policing is going to have to figure out how to fight that. Fight fire with fire, probably use AI tools to fight AI, so that there might be these two sort of parallel paths, and we're going to have to look at how they cross-pollinate, maybe?
what a great point.
Yeah, I'd say one of the things that we jump to is, losing all of our jobs. Before replacement is augmentation, right? We're all clear on that. There's some organizations that will have replacement, but typically the first phase is augmentation, meaning that we have bionic abilities that should we choose to learn how to use them and use them well. And I think that's the first challenge to organizations, is not buying into the threat of replacement or just the threat of the unknown, but recognize I got new tools, man. I've got a new set of abilities, and your law enforcement example is a really good one in that they have those tools. It's very hard to fight, a bionic enemy without my bionics. Like I need to have those same capabilities. So there's certainly a first wave of learning of what does it mean to have these new capabilities. And I think we need to help our people get comfortable that they don't have the same tools, or they have a new set of tools that they have to adapt to.
Hey,
Brian, I have a comment.
yeah?
Can I, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
I'm just remembering what he said about humility at the beginning, too, in moderators, too. So one opportunity we have right now, given
That's enough time. Thank you.
There you go. Well done, Brian. I'll change my
You're evaluating.
yeah my evaluation here. Opportunity that Times gives us is staff shortage. You know, Larry's right, and Larry had kind of that quick reaction that it depends on, well, part of what it depends on is the times. We've all been through times when revenue was short, budget cutting was happening. I mean, right now, your point about augmentation, Gordon, is that resonates because everybody's trying to do, can't recruit to fill the amount of work. So if you can shrink the amount of work, you know, and on our side, it's more revenue per FTE. On the public sector side, it's, you know, diverting non-emergency call services so that we can decrease our response times, our answer times. So,
Thank you. You know, I think it's important, again, I hope to leave the group when you say, as we started, that anxiety has gone up a couple points throughout the day, that hopefully there's some aspects of this that either regulates that or lowers that to some degree. And this recognition that we have huge opportunities for efficiency right now, huge opportunities for things that we didn't think were possible right now. And, you know, it's an exciting time, or it's like, you know, I run away and, or, you know, pull the covers over my head. I mean, you have the choice of how you're going to react to that. But, you know, with these new bionic arms and ears and, you know, this new way of listening and understanding and this new way of gathering data, there is a birth of new business models, a birth of new capabilities that I've never seen in my life. And I was starting my first company at the birth of the internet, and I remember all of that. That was a giant wave, and we always talk about how big a wave that's been. But this is a freaking tsunami. Like, this is a different world.
Yeah.
And you got to strap on and get excited for the ride, or, you know, it's the classic thing. If you're sort of the waiter staring at, you know, the tray of glasses as you're walking, you're going to drop stuff. But if you know where you're heading and you're looking towards it and you're walking with pace and conviction, you're going to get to the other side. So I think this is really important.
You know, I'm going to touch on this concept of leaders and tools. And the first part, I can't help but think about this augmentation shift. What a great opportunity as a leader to inspire your team, right? Our team has a great opportunity to live, learn, and teach together. And then the second piece is, as leaders, we have our tools that we rely on all the time. And as we were preparing for this, we talked about a scenario that Adam Grant includes in his book, Think Again. And Gordon, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because when you leave here and you think about your tools, your superpower, whatever that might be, as a leader among your team, as this big tsunami comes, what tools are you going to use to lead your team? And there's a great anecdote that I think Gordon will talk briefly about that'll help us think about our use of tools.
It's a nice book, and I know we're getting close on time, but we talked in the opening of this segment about learning. Let me speak out of both sides of my mouth and say that unlearning may be more important than learning. What do I mean by unlearning? So this is a great story from Adam Grant, if you haven't heard it before. You know, it's a group of smoke jumpers, and this crew, about 14 of them were out, and they're fighting a fire as they do. And, you know, they've done this many, many times, and sometimes the fire just is overwhelming, and they can't fight it anymore. And this is one of those situations where it became a moment in time of, like, we could die. So the group of firefighters who are very experienced in this found that panic moment of, like, what are we going to do? The fire is consuming us. And they started running. And a couple groups did different things. One group, you know, built like a structure, and they were unfortunately demolished, and many perished in this scenario. Most of them ran and were perished in the fires because they couldn't run fast enough. One, who happened to be the chief, and they saw him doing this, but they didn't know what to do with it. He stopped, and he took out his book of matches and lit a fire. And they're like, wait a second, you're lighting a fire in the middle of this crazy fire, and they kept running. Well, he created a fire around him so that nothing can burn in his local area, and he was the one who lived to tell the story. Now, when they found most of the firefighters who ran and perished, they had their backpacks, which have about 35 pounds of equipment on them. But in reflection, they weren't fighting the fire anymore. They were running. All they had to do is remove their backpacks to be able to run faster. And they may have gotten away from the fire. Now, you think, okay, you know, it's such a simple sort of anecdote. But the story, as Adam tells it, I think is really poignant because they didn't stop to think about taking off their backpacks. And they have all of these tools, these crazy heavy tools that don't serve them in the situation of running. So as he told us the story, we had him as a speaker at our event, he asked us this question, which I'll ask you guys, which is, what tools are you carrying that no longer serve you? What are you holding on to that is weighing you down in the situation that we find ourselves in? We could call AI in this moment that we're in a firestorm. We can call it some sort of big event that we're in. And I'm quite certain, I know it was true for our firm, and you know, we've scaled up and we've thought about this for years, and we're pretty smart folks in OliverWyman, but we were, to some degree, you know, unprepared to let go of certain tools, and it took something. So it's just a wonderful reflection, I think, as a closing question for yourselves and to sit with is as we go into this, what is weighing us down? It might be a mindset, it might be a policy, it might be an actual method of how you do your work, but when you think about the heaviness of that backpack and you sort of hold on to that image in your mind for your own situation, yeah, it would be a lovely reflection in as a leader as you move forward on what do you need to unlearn and let go of.
Yeah, that book was Think Again. I'm a big fan of resources and walking out of sessions like this with some. There's another book by Jay Shetty called To Think Like a Monk, and in that he talks about this concept of shedding. He said shedding happens in nature all the time. Trees shed their leaves, reptiles shed skin, but we as humans have the hardest time shedding behaviors, shedding friends that aren't healthy to us anymore. And so as we think about what tools are we willing to leave behind, what behaviors are we willing to shed, that will be required to open this new sort of wave of innovation into our teams, into ourselves, and into our lives. We have some time for Q&A. I do want to recap.
Ryan?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to just, I'm sorry. I wanted to figure out which was the best opportunity to mess with them.
I'm just going to say.
So listen, I just want to use the shedding analogy. It won't take long. How I think that public sector sheds is they have people retire. It's not about the backpack. It's not about the bring them up to the awareness or the education. It sometimes is about the Peter Principle. It's about the reassignments, or it's about it's time for retirement. And in some ways, that's not negative. That is pragmatic in certain ways, and that happens in the private sector as well. But that is the reason why we are so concerned about training the young leaders, right? We're talking about training them to know that their backpack is optional, to know that this is only supposed to be used when you need to do it. When we were being trained, or when the firemen were being trained, you know, that I was supposed to be with you until you were returned to the truck. That was the only option to you. Private sector and public sector have different ways of doing it naturally. That's all I wanted to say.
Any questions from the audience for Maria or Gordon? Great. Alex, will you roll the next slide? We do want to close today's session with just a comment about the future of these topics and most importantly, what it looks like for IJIS as we move forward. Before I do that, I want to recap a few key themes that I heard throughout today. Beginner versus expert mindset, really great one. This concept of self-regulation and your responsibility as a leader to embrace that. We are in this together. We should be doing it together. Creating a culture of experimentation, a freedom to fail mindset within your team. Understanding what your team members' fears are, and I say team members, they could be who you report to or who reports to you. The 3 traits uncovered by Gordon's organization: open sensing, inspiring ambition, and adaptive co-creation. I love that last one. I think it's something we can embrace here at IJIS. Team member value and the contribution to the organization. Let's recognize what they bring to the table as we think about things like augmentation. Don't overlook vernacular and language, culture shock, and the education needed to bring people along. Maintaining humility. Sir? Man, we would never have a conference in Nashville ever again. And unlearning and shedding. I think that's a really powerful concept. So as we move forward, we're excited to announce that beginning this October, IJIS will be launching its own series of leadership opportunities, and they'll take place throughout the country in experiential learning centers. Our first, go ahead, Alex, you can move the next one. Our first one will take place in October at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Well, we'll talk about really important concepts around our ability to lead within the framework of policy, i.e. the Constitution, what it means to lead through massive change. And so we're excited that that will take place, and that will be our keynote, not our keynote, our very first leadership session. More to come on that. But we do plan to cover important topics over the next 12 to 18 months, including change management, leading through creativity, creating a culture of experimentation, and communication, the agile leader. And Maria, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on what that's going to look like, but there'll be webinar series, workshops, in-person retreats, executive leadership track, emerging leader tracks. So we're really, really excited, and Gordon has agreed to join us on a few of those. And so we're looking forward to it.
The only thing I'll add is, much like the educational process that we've been chatting about with regard to AI, that it's going to be building over time, and that every new idea that we see of value, we're going to embed within the longer term strategy. That same notion is going to be with the leadership portfolio. Several of the individuals that we had here today, or that were part of the discussion, that we see provide a perspective to this dialogue, whether it is the retreat, whether it is the webinars, whether it is individuals to support to either public sector agencies or private sector entities. We want to build on that. We're looking for your engagement in that. We're looking for your interest in it. So always know that you have a voice, but we just need you to convey that to us.
Yeah, and in closing, I just want to thank Gordon for being here. He generously volunteered to be a part of this program and has set aside time leading up to this. So I will give him and his new company a plug. If your organization is interested in using AI to engage your team, I highly encourage you to reach out to Gordon. He'll be here for a few minutes afterwards. His company is Agency 150, and the platform they use is incredibly dynamic. I've had the opportunity to kind of work with him on providing feedback. Super intuitive, really, really refreshing. And I know a lot of us can use something like that as we lead our teams into the new age. So thank you, Gordon, for your time.
My pleasure.
Always great to see you. It only took 52 years for us to be on the stage together, but it was worth it, I hope.
You did great, by the way.
Thank you. I need that. All right, guys, it was really great to see all of you again. Have a great rest of the conference, and we'll see you around.